This is my reflection for assignment 1 for COMP348 at Athabasca University, which is Java network programming. So the assignment requires us to take some code examples from our textbook, Java network programming, and modify it to perform certain tasks. Overall, I found this assignment to be a good introduction to Java network programming. There's a lot of pretty good use cases in here to demonstrate stuff you might want to do with these techniques. And overall, it's a pretty easy assignment because there's code that we're allowed to use, basically steal, wholesale, modify to perform the required tasks. Don't forget to put the required credit in your code. So here is the header for the code that reads the data from the weblog. Actually, so in the particular example given, we start out with this task, which I didn't modify at all. And all this basically does is it performs a reverse lookup of the IP address and tries to get the host name. One of the challenges I ran into with this application was that we're given a log file that is pretty long and also pretty out of date. So I think this is it here. A lot of lines of code, and a lot of these IP addresses probably don't resolve to anything anymore, so they tend to time out. It takes a pretty long time to run the whole thing. So what I'm gonna suggest is if you're doing this task, just make a mini version. So I've got one here that's got about 65 lines of code, and some of the host names I know for sure will resolve. So there's the entire thing. Much faster to run that. It takes like a few seconds instead of many minutes. You don't really want to be having to run this over and over again just to process a log file. So in a nutshell, you can take the PooledWeblog application. So here's all the documentation that we're required to add with a test plan demonstrating here's what happens when you run the code in different scenarios. So I try to print a little bit of helpful text when the user calls it with no parameters so they can see what the relevant arguments are and examples of usage and that sort of stuff. So this is the code that prints all that stuff. If there are fewer than 2 arguments, it can do that. All right, so in a nutshell, I just had to take the code, and in the section that would normally print the line of the log file, I've commented that out right down here. So normally you print that line out. So instead what I'm doing is taking 2 variables, which are these little hash maps here, and then that's taking looking for the host name. If it finds it, it adds it into the hash map. If it doesn't find it, it adds it to the hash map. If it's already there, it just increments the count for the number of accesses and also adds the number of bytes, which is the thing on the end of the line. So for this assignment, some regular expressions will be your friend. Here we can see should that be the host name, or the number of bytes actually is what this is looking for. Yeah, so overall, pretty simple assignment. There's a few components. Just go through, look at the second argument that the user passes. If it's 1, you can print the number of accesses. If it's 2, print the total bytes. 3, print the bytes transferred to each host. In my case, I'm actually doing all that computation anyways. The only thing that the argument is changing is what is actually getting printed. All right, so the second part of the assignment is the thing that does the source viewer. This is kind of neat. In this case, you've got a little sample of code. I just took the one from chapter 5 of the textbook, and I modified it so that instead of printing, normally it would be printing the text line by line, but instead what I'm doing is I'm using a string builder, which is here, and building the string, obviously, And once it finds character 13, which is a carriage return, it will, like a new line, it will compare with the regular expression using matcher. If it's a match, it prints it along with the line number. So I'm just creating a little counter basically that increments with each line. And if I find a match with the supplied regular expression, I print it out. Pretty straightforward. Little thing I found here is that Windows line endings can kind of trip this up. So if I find a character 10, which is like a line feed character that Windows uses, then I just skip it. And I suppose in theory that could cause some issues if you find some file made with like very old versions of Mac OS, which used to use only an LF character, a line feed character. But it does the job. So I'm just going to quickly demo the apps running on the command line. So I've been using NetBeans for development, even though it's not recommended, but I'm used to it. Works pretty well. So we've got a couple of applications here. They're already compiled into classes. So we can do the my PooledWeblog class. And so for that one, we're going to run, let's just do this with the access log partial, because otherwise it'll probably take a while. So if we run it without a parameter, it's going to give us a little message saying, hey, you forgot to specify an option. So let's do number 1. It's going to read our log file that's supplied, build a nice hash map of all the hosts. Even with the small file, this can take a while the first time. After that, it's cached, so it should be much faster. There you go. So it shows how many accesses each host had. And I suppose if you really wanted, you could copy and paste that into an Excel file or something like that. And we do the parameter 2. Pretty simple, shows the number of bytes transmitted. Notice that it ran much faster this time. And parameter 3 shows the bytes for each of the hosts. Next is the, what's it called? SourceViewer app. So this one's kind of fun. So again, no parameters. It'll give you some usage instructions. So we can use my personal website. Actually, if you just specify something like that, it doesn't consider that a URL. You do need the protocol. So we'll put in HTTP, go to jdleon.com. And if you specify that with, in my case, I made it so that if you specify no second parameter, it'll just print the page, which is very similar to the original functionality of the app. So if we specify next, as per the documentation here, if we specify a string, so here you can put some kind of regular expression. So for example, I can specify JD. It'll search for anything with the words JD. If I wanted, I could make something a little fancier, like say, let's look for anything where the line starts with a space character. And there you go. So here's all the lines that have a tab or a space at the beginning. So any regular expression should work there. And yeah, kind of a fun little assignment. Overall, not too difficult, and gives you a pretty good overview of some of the fun things you can do with Java network programming. So thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions or anything.